The university common room was not a quiet place. On most days, it was filled with the noise of students rushing to classes, the sound of lunch wrappers crinkling, and the hum of loud conversations about exams, dates, and weekend plans. But in the far corner of the room, near the tall windows that looked out onto the quad, there was a different kind of noise. It was a sharper sound, a rhythmic, aggressive clack-clack-clack of wooden pieces. Being slammed down onto a board, this was the domain of the chess players. It wasn't an official club by any means. There were no sign-up sheets, no faculty advisors, and no scheduled meetings. It was just a group of about 6 or 7 guys who claimed this corner every day after lunch. They were an exclusive bunch, a circle of wooden chairs and scratch tables that acted like a fortress wall against the rest of the university. The leader of this unofficial club was a young man who sat with his legs sprawled out, taking up as much space as possible. We'll call him the king of the corner. He had a way of leaning back in his chair, balancing on the back 2 legs, with a look of total confidence on his face. He wasn't just playing a game. He was conducting a war. Around him, the other guys laughed loudly at his jokes, even when they weren't funny, and nodded in agreement with his opinions, even when they were wrong. They fed on his energy. The air in the corner was thick with competition. It smelled faintly of coffee and old books, but mostly, it smelled like ego. Every game played in this corner was about more than just checkmates. It was about who was smarter, who was faster, and who was the alpha. If you won, you were the man for the day. If you lost, you were the target for their jokes. On this particular afternoon, the games were intense. The king of the corner had just finished destroying another student. He had used a classic opening, aggressive and brutal, trapping his opponent in just a few short minutes. The loser shook his head, gathered his backpack, and walked away, looking a little defeated. The winner slammed his king piece down on the table in triumph. "Too easy," he said, his voice loud enough to carry across the room. He looked around at his friends. "Is there anyone else? Or are you all scared to lose?" The group laughed. One of his friends, a tall guy wearing a hoodie, shook his head. "I'm not falling for that today. You're in a mood. You'd crush me just to make yourself feel better." "Smart man," the king replied, grinning. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a timer, setting it down on the table with a loud thud. "Come on, there has to be someone. Chess is a game of the mind, gentlemen. It seems my mind is sharper than yours today." It was around this time that Alina walked into the common room. She wasn't part of this group. In fact, she usually went out of her way to avoid the noisy corners. She was a literature student, usually found with her nose buried in a thick novel or typing away on her laptop in the quietest section of the library. Today, however, the quiet section was closed for cleaning. The rest of the campus was packed. Alina carried a heavy tote bag filled with books. She looked around the crowded room, searching for an empty seat. The only spot available was a small armchair right next to the chess player's corner. It wasn't ideal. She could hear their loud voices from all the way across the room. But she was tired, and her feet hurt, so she walked over and sat down. She opened her book, trying to block out the noise. But it was hard. The king of the corner had a voice that demanded attention. He was bragging about a game he played online, using words that didn't make sense to most people but made him sound very important to his friends. "You see, the mistake he made was on move 4, the king explained, pointing a finger at the empty board as if a ghost game was still being played there. He underestimated the center. You never underestimate the center. If you control the center, you control the game. It's basic psychology." Elena tried to focus on her page. She read the same sentence 3 times, but the words weren't sinking in. She looked up. The guys were all laughing. The king was resetting the chess pieces, placing the pawns down with a satisfying click. He lined up the white pieces on his side and the black pieces on the other. He did it with such care, treating the plastic and wooden objects like treasures. She found herself watching him. It had been a long time since she had played chess. Her grandfather had taught her when she was a little girl. He used to sit with her at the kitchen table on rainy Sundays, the radio playing softly in the background. He never let her win. He told her that losing was the best way to learn. Asterisk chess is not about being smart, Alina Asterisk, he used to say, his old hands moving the pieces slowly. Asterisk, it is about being quiet. It is about listening to what the board wants. The board will talk to you if you stay quiet long enough. Asterisk, she watched the young men at the table. They weren't listening to the board. They were shouting over it. They were playing speed chess, moving their pieces instantly after the other person moved, relying on memory and aggression rather than thought. The king tapped his foot impatiently while his friend thought about his move. "Come on, hurry up," the king complained. "Are you going to move, or are you going to paint a picture? We don't have all day." "Just thinking," the friend muttered, his hand hovering over a knight. "Don't think too much. You might hurt yourself," one of the other guys joked. The group roared with laughter. Alina looked back down at her book. She felt a small spark of annoyance. It wasn't just the noise. It was the attitude. They acted like they owned the game. They acted like chess was a secret club that only tough, loud guys could understand. She remembered the quiet Sundays with her grandfather. She remembered the feeling of the pieces in her hand, smooth and cool. She remembered the silence of the house, the only sound being the clock ticking and the pieces clicking. Suddenly, the king of the corner stood up. He had finished another game, another victory. He looked frustrated now. He wanted a real challenge. He looked around the common room, scanning the faces of the students passing by. Most people were ignoring them, wearing headphones, or looking at their phones. "This is boring," the king announced to his friends. "No one here can play. It's like shooting fish in a barrel." "Maybe we should go play video games," the tall friend suggested. "At least the computer puts up a fight." "No," the king said, crossing his arms. He paced a little bit behind the table. "I want to play a person. I want to see the look in someone's eyes when they realize they're trapped." His eyes wandered over the room and finally landed on the armchair next to the table. He saw Alina. She was still pretending to read, but her bookmark hadn't moved in 20 minutes. He noticed she was watching the board. He smirked. It was the kind of smirk that didn't reach his eyes. He saw a girl sitting alone with a big book of poetry. To him, she looked like the easiest target in the world. He thought it would be funny. He thought his friends would get a kick out of it. "Hey," he said, loudly. Alina looked up, startled. She wasn't sure if he was talking to her. "Yeah, you," the king said, stepping closer to her chair. "You've been staring at the board for half an hour. Do you even know how the pieces move?" The friends laughed. It was a mean laugh, the kind of laugh that sets a tone. They pulled their chairs in closer, forming a semicircle around the table. They were waiting for the show. Alina closed her book slowly. She felt the eyes of the whole group on her. She knew exactly what this was. She had seen it before in other settings, guys testing girls to see if they belonged. Usually she just ignored it. But there was something about his arrogance, about the way he treated the chessboard with so much reverence, but treated people with so little. That annoyed her. She stood up. She wasn't tall, and she didn't look intimidating. She looked like any other student on campus, wearing jeans and a comfortable sweater. "I was just watching," Alina said. Her voice was calm, much calmer than she felt. "It looked like you were judging," the king said, leaning against the table. "Do you play?" "A little bit," she said. She didn't want to give him too much. She didn't want to tell him about the tournaments she played in as a kid, or the shelves of trophies collecting dust in her parents' attic. "A little bit," the king mimicked, chuckling. He looked at his friends. "See? Everyone thinks they can play a little bit." Turned back to her. "Listen, we're looking for a game. Since you seem to have an opinion on how we play, why don't you sit down?" The invitation hung in the air like a trap. The room felt quieter suddenly. Even the students nearby stopped talking to watch. Everyone knew what was happening. It was a setup. He expected her to say no. He expected her to get embarrassed and walk away. Or if she did sit down, he expected to crush her in 4 moves so he could high-five his buddies and feel superior. "Unless you're busy," the king added, gesturing to her heavy book. "I wouldn't want to interrupt your poetry reading," emphasized the word poetry as if it were something useless. The friends snickered again. Alina looked at the board. The black and white squares seemed to stare back at her. She thought about her grandfather. She thought about how much she loved the game and how much she hated how these guys were acting like they owned it. A small voice in the back of her head told her to sit back down and open her book. It was safer that way. But the other part of her, the part that hated bullies, straightened her spine. "I have some time," Alina said. She walked over to the table. The king grinned, thinking he had already won. He pulled out a chair for her, but he didn't push it in. He just gestured to it, like a king granting a favor to a peasant. "Great," he said, rubbing his hands together. "Don't worry, I'll go easy on you. We'll play a blitz game. 5 minutes on the clock. That means we move fast. It won't hurt too much." Alina sat down. The chair was hard. The table was covered in scratches and carved initials. The chess clock was between them, the buttons red and black, waiting to be pushed. "What's your name?" the king asked, but he didn't really care. "Elena," she said. "Well, Elena," he said, starting the clock. "I hope you're ready to lose." He was reaching for his white pawn, ready to control the center, ready to dominate the game just like he dominated the conversation. He had no idea who was sitting across from him. He just saw a girl with a book. He saw a joke. But as Alina placed her hands on the edge of the table, the joking stopped in her own mind. She wasn't the literature student anymore. She was a chess player, and she was about to teach him a lesson he wouldn't forget. The wooden chair felt harder than usual as Alina sat down. Across the table, the young man, we'll call the king of the corner, was leaning back, a wide smirk plastered across his face. He looked like a cat that had just caught a mouse, completely at ease with the situation. He wasn't taking her seriously. He was treating this whole interaction as a performance for his friends. To him, Alina wasn't an opponent. She was a prop. She was a break in the monotony of the afternoon, a chance to show off in front of his audience. Around them, the common room had shifted. The low buzz of conversations from other tables had died down. Students who were previously eating sandwiches or scrolling through their phones were now glancing over. The energy in the room was changing from casual study hall to a spectator sport. People sensed a confrontation, even if they didn't know the rules. They could see the group of guys closing in, the circle tightening around the small wooden table. The king reached out and tapped the chess clock, resetting the dials. He didn't ask if Alina knew how to use it. He assumed she didn't. 5 minutes each, he announced loudly, making sure everyone could hear. Blitz chess. Speed. That means we don't sit there staring at the ceiling for 20 minutes. We move. We play. He picked up the white queen and the black rook, holding them concealed in his fists. "Pick for your color," he said. He extended his hands toward her. Alina looked at his fists. They were large, his knuckles red from being cracked too often. She knew that in casual games, the person who is challenged often gets to choose the color. But she didn't argue. She didn't care about the color. Chess wasn't about white or black. It was about the structure of the position. She tapped his left hand. He opened it to reveal the black pawn. "Black," he said, dropping the piece carelessly on the table. "Unlucky. White has the advantage, initiative, control. I know the rules," Alina said softly. Her voice was quiet, but it cut through his arrogance like a knife. The king laughed, a short, sharp sound. "Good, saves me the explaining." He immediately sat up straighter. The lazy posture vanished the moment he touched his pieces. He slammed his king's pawn forward, pushing it to the very center of the board. Clack! It was a loud, aggressive sound. He put his finger on the clock button, stopping his time and starting hers. He looked at her, eyes wide, challenging her. "Your move." Alina looked at the board. The white pawn sat on e4, the center square. It was the most standard opening in the history of chess. It was bold, it was direct, and it was exactly what she expected. She could feel the eyes of the guys burning a hole in the top of her head. They were waiting for her to hesitate. They were waiting for her to ask, "Which one does this one move again? Or can I move that one there?" She didn't hesitate. She reached out, her fingers finding her black pawn. She moved it to e5, matching his aggression, claiming her own share of the center. She pressed the clock button with a firm click. The king raised an eyebrow, a flicker of surprise crossing his face, but it vanished instantly. He had expected her to play passively, to move a piece on the edge of the board. but she had matched him. Okay, he muttered. Not totally clueless then. He moved his knight, jumping it out to f3, attacking her center pawn. He hit the clock hard. Alina responded instantly. She moved her knight to c6, defending her pawn and developing her own piece. Click. The game began to accelerate. The king was playing fast, relying on his memory of opening patterns. He moved his bishop to c4, aiming at her weakest point, the f7 square. This is the Italian game, a classic setup to attack a beginner who doesn't see the checkmate coming. He was setting a trap, waiting for her to make a rookie mistake. The friends watching were getting into it. She's actually playing, one whispered, loud enough for her to hear. Yeah, but watch this, another replied. He's setting her up. She has no idea what's coming. Alina saw it. She saw the bishop aiming at her king. She saw the knight ready to join the attack. It was a trap she had fallen for 100 times when she was 6 years old, learning from her grandfather. She heard his old voice in her head again. Asterisk, don't look at the pieces he is moving, Alina. Look at the squares they are looking at. Asterisk, she took her time on this move. The clock was ticking. Her time was ticking down, but she didn't care about the seconds. She cared about the geometry. The king was tapping his fingers on the table, trying to rush her, trying to make her panic. Clock's running, he sang. She tuned him out. She saw the move. It wasn't a defense. It was a counterattack. She moved her bishop to c5. It was a mirror image of his move. A bold statement saying, asterisk, I see your attack, and I'm attacking right back. Asterisk. She pressed the clock. The king stopped tapping his fingers. He looked at the board, then at her, then back at the board. The smirk faltered just a little bit. He wasn't used to people playing back at him. Usually, opponents just crumbled under the speed. They would defend and defend and defend until their position fell apart. But Alina was already striking at him. He let out a humph sound, as if to brush it off. He moved his knight to c3, protecting his king and developing another piece. He was still following the book, the standard rules of opening theory. He wasn't thinking anymore. He was just reacting. Alina looked at the board. The pieces were dancing. The middle of the board was a contested territory, a battlefield. She felt a strange calm wash over her. The noise of the common room faded away. The laughter of the boys became a dull hum in the background. All she saw were the 64 squares and the possibilities within them. She knew she couldn't beat him by playing his game. He played blitz chess fast, messy, based on instinct and intimidation. If she tried to play faster than him, she would lose. He had the experience of these chaotic 5-minute games. She had to change the rhythm. She had to make him stop. She reached out and moved her knight. Not to a square he expected, but to f6. A solid, developing move. But then, she did something different. She didn't press the clock immediately. She sat back. She folded her hands in her lap. She looked him in the eye. The king blinked. He looked at the clock. Her red flag was still ticking, stealing away her seconds, but she didn't seem to care. He looked back at her, confused. Are you going to move or what? I did move, she said calmly. The group of guys leaned in. She moved the knight, bro, one of them pointed out. No, she moved the knight. The king snapped. Why isn't she hitting the clock? He wanted her to be in a panic. He wanted her to feel the pressure of the time draining away. But she was sitting there perfectly still, like a statue. She was stripping away his power. The clock wasn't a weapon for him anymore. It was just a machine. She was controlling the pace. She was controlling him. He felt a sudden itch of irritation. This wasn't part of the joke. The joke was supposed to be easy. He was supposed to crush her, laugh, and go back to his coffee. But she was making him uncomfortable. She was making him wait. Finally, he realized he was just staring at her. He shook his head, trying to clear his thoughts. Fine, whatever, he grumbled. He looked at the board, ready to crush her position, ready to punish her for wasting time. He reached out to capture a pawn. He thought he saw a weakness. He thought she had left a piece undefended. He grabbed his bishop. ready to take her knight. A move that would give him a material advantage apiece for a pawn. His hand was in the air. He was ready to strike. And then he stopped. His hand hovered over the board. He froze. He looked closer at the position. He looked at where his bishop was going and where her pieces were. If he took the knight, his king would be exposed. If he took the knight, she could move her queen to a square he hadn't even noticed. A square that he had forgotten about in his arrogance. It wasn't a trap in the traditional sense. It was a psychological space. She had invited him to take the piece. She had left it sitting there like bait on a hook. And he had almost taken it. He had almost walked right into the checkmate line without even seeing it. He slowly pulled his hand back. The silence at the table was heavy now. The friends weren't laughing anymore. They were looking at the board, trying to figure out why their leader hadn't taken the piece. They saw the opening too. Why didn't he take it? "What are you waiting for?" One of them whispered. "Take it." "Shut up," the king hissed. He could feel sweat forming on his forehead. This wasn't right. He looked at Alina. She was still watching him, her face completely blank. She gave nothing away. No fear, no excitement, no nerves. She just watched. He realized then that he wasn't playing a random girl off the street. The silence he had mocked earlier, the silence that he thought was emptiness, was actually full. Her mind was loud. She was calculating. She was waiting. He swallowed hard. He moved his bishop back to safety, a passive, defensive move. He pressed the clock. He had retreated. Alina didn't celebrate. She didn't smile. She just leaned forward, her eyes locking onto the board with a new intensity. The joke was over. The warm-up was done. Now it was a game. She reached out, and in that moment, the air in the common room shifted completely. The guys stopped leaning back in their chairs. They sat forward. They realized that something strange was happening at the table. The girl with the book wasn't just playing. She was winning, and she hadn't even made her real move yet. Asterisk, the silence that settled over the table was heavy, almost suffocating. It was a strange contrast to the noisy common room just a few feet away. People were still walking by, still talking about lunch and classes. But the space around the chess table felt like a vacuum. The air had changed. The young man who had been so arrogant moments ago. The king of the corner was sitting perfectly still. His hand was hovering near his king, but he wasn't moving. He was staring at the board as if it had suddenly burst into flames. The confident smirk was gone, wiped away like chalk on a wet sidewalk. In its place was a look of pure, uncomfortable confusion. Around the table, his friends were shifting in their seats. The tall guy in the hoodie stopped spinning his pen. The guy with the glasses leaned in closer, squinting at the wooden pieces. They weren't laughing anymore. They were exchanging glances with each other, shrugging their shoulders. They didn't understand what was happening. They just knew the script had been broken. Alina sat across from him, calm and steady. She could feel the tension radiating off him. She knew what he was seeing. On the surface, the board looked safe. But beneath the surface, the structure was shifting. By choosing not to take the piece he thought he could have, he had lost his rhythm. He was now playing her game, not his. He finally made a move. It was a pawn move, pushing a small soldier forward one square. It was a timid move, a defensive move. It was the kind of move you make when you are scared to die. He pressed the clock, but there was no force behind it. It was a weak tap. Alina didn't wait this time. She reached out and moved her knight. Clack, the sound was sharp and crisp in the quiet air. She was beginning the attack now. For the first few moves, she had been feeling him out like a boxer testing an opponent's guard. Now, she had seen the crack in the armor. She knew he relied on aggression. He relied on bullying people into making mistakes. But she refused to be bullied. She refused to react to his speed. She moved her pieces not to where they were safe, but to where they were active. Her knights and bishops were pointing directly at his king, like arrows drawn in a bow. She was building a web. She was creating a trap that was invisible to anyone who wasn't looking for it. The king rubbed his chin, scratching at the stubble. He looked annoyed. He hated this. He hated that she was playing slowly. He hated that she was looking at the board with such intense focus, while he was checking the clock every 5 seconds. He was a blitz player. He won by making the other person panic. But Alina wasn't panicking. In fact, she seemed to be breathing slower than usual. "Are you going to think all day?" He snapped, trying to break her concentration. It was a classic tactic. If you can't beat the game, you beat the player. You try to make them angry. You try to make them feel stupid. Alina didn't look up. She kept her eyes on the 64 squares. "The clock is for time, not for rushing," she said quietly. The friends chuckled nervously. It was a burn, but it wasn't a loud, aggressive insult. It was just a fact. The king's face turned a shade darker. He reached out and grabbed his rook, sliding it aggressively to the side of the board. He was trying to open up the lines. He was trying to create chaos. If he could make the board messy, with pieces everywhere, he thought he could confuse her. He thought he could rely on his instinct to save him. He pressed the clock and looked at her, challenging her with his eyes. "There. Now. Do something." Alina looked at the rook. It was a mistake. A big one. In his rush to create chaos, he had left a diagonal line open. It was a tiny gap, no bigger than a needle, but to her, it looked like a highway. She could hear her grandfather's voice again. Asterisk, when they open the door, Alina, you walk through it. Don't ask permission. Don't knock. Just walk in. Asterisk. She saw the sequence. It wasn't 1 move deep. It was 4 moves deep. It was a combination that required precision. If she missed it, he would counterattack, and she would lose. But she didn't miss it. She never missed it. She reached out and moved her bishop. It slid across the board, stopping right in the center of the action. It was a quiet move. It didn't capture anything. It didn't threaten his king immediately. It just sat there, controlling the most important squares on the board. The king frowned. He looked at the bishop. He looked at her. "What does that do?" he asked, genuine curiosity mixed with mockery in his voice. "It's just sitting there." He picked up his knight, ready to jump it forward and attack her bishop. He was going to take it. He was sure of it. Just as his hand was about to grab the knight, he stopped. He froze. His eyes widened. He saw it. He saw that if he took the bishop, his queen would be trapped. If he moved his knight, his king would be exposed to a check he couldn't block. The weak bishop was actually a guard dog. The quiet square it sat on was a landmine. He pulled his hand back so fast he almost knocked over his king. The guy in the hoodie leaned in. "Dude, take the bishop. It's free. Don't touch it." The king shouted. The words came out louder than he intended. A few people at a nearby table looked over, startled by the sudden outburst. The king took a deep breath, trying to compose himself. He felt the walls closing in. He looked at the board, but no matter where he looked, he saw trouble. His pieces were clumsy. They were on the wrong squares. They were getting in each other's way. Her pieces, on the other hand, were working together. They were like a team of soldiers holding hands. If he attacked one, another one would defend it. If he ran away, they would chase him. He realized with a sinking feeling in his stomach that he was losing. Not just the game, but the narrative. He was no longer the hunter. He was the prey. He sat there for a long time. The clock ticked down. He had 2 minutes left. She had 3 minutes. He was burning time trying to find a way out of the maze she had built. He was sweating now. A small bead of sweat rolled down his temple. Alina just watched him. She wasn't celebrating. She wasn't smiling. She was just waiting. She knew he had no good moves. She knew he was trapped. It was a terrible feeling in chess, knowing that no matter what you do, it will be wrong. Finally, he made a move. It was a desperate move. He pushed his king forward, walking into the open. It was a mistake born of panic. He just wanted to do something, anything, to change the situation. Alina's eyes narrowed slightly. This was it. She reached out. She moved her queen. It wasn't a fast, aggressive slam. It was a slow, deliberate placement. She slid the queen across the board, deep into his territory. She placed it on a square next to his king, cutting off his escape route. Click, the sound of the clock button seemed to echo in the silence. The king stared at the queen. It was beautiful and terrifying. He looked at his king. He looked at the corner of the board. He saw the checkmate coming. It wasn't happening right this second, but it was inevitable. It was like seeing a storm on the horizon and knowing you can't outrun it. He looked up at Alina for the first time, really looked at her. He saw the way she sat, the way she held her hands, the way her eyes never left the board. He realized that the quiet girl with the book wasn't a spectator. She was a shark. She had let him swim around, feeling safe, feeling like the king of the ocean. And then, without him noticing, she had circled behind him. The friends were silent now. They were looking at the board, trying to find a way out for their leader, but they couldn't. Even the guy in the hoodie, who didn't play much, could see that the white pieces were in trouble. They were tangled up. They were cornered. The king let out a long, shaky breath. He leaned back in his chair, but he wasn't balancing on the back legs anymore. He was slumped forward, his elbows on his knees, his head in his hands. The arrogance was gone. The performance was over. The reality of the situation was sitting right in front of him, carved in wood and stone. He had challenged a joke, and the joke was on him. The room was so quiet, you could hear the hum of the vending machine in the hallway. It wasn't a comfortable silence anymore. It was the kind of silence that happens when everyone realizes they have been wrong about something important. The guys standing around the table weren't leaning back with their arms crossed anymore. They were hunched over, their faces close to the board, trying to find a flaw in the position that simply wasn't there. The king of the corner stared at the board as if it were written in a foreign language. His confident smirk had completely vanished, replaced by a deep frown that creased his forehead. He kept looking at his digital clock. He had plenty of time left, over a minute and a half, but time didn't matter if you didn't have a plan. He was tapping his fingers on the table, a nervous tick he hadn't shown at the start of the game. Tap, tap, tap. It was the only sound in the corner. He reached out to move his rook, maybe thinking he could block the attack, but he pulled his hand back at the last second. He knew better. He could feel it in his gut. If he moved the rook, she would slide her bishop in, and it would be over. If he moved his king, she would check him with the queen. Every path he tried to walk down led to a cliff. He looked up at Alina. For the first time, he really saw her. Not just as a girl, or a student, or a stranger, but as an opponent. She was sitting perfectly still, her breathing slow and rhythmic. She wasn't gloating. She wasn't looking around at the audience to see if they were impressed. She was just looking at the board with the calm focus of a surgeon. It unnerved him. He was used to opponents getting nervous when they were winning. He was used to them rushing, trying to finish the game quickly, making a sloppy mistake in their excitement. But she was patient. She was waiting for him to make the mistake. She was content to let the clock run down minute by minute while he suffered in the chair. "Are you just going to stare at it?" one of the friends whispered. The guy sounded annoyed, like he was embarrassed that his leader was struggling. "I'm thinking," the king snapped. His voice was harsh, but there was a tremor in it. "You're running out of time," another friend pointed out unhelpfully. The king ignored them. He knew they were right, though. The blitz style he loved so much had turned against him. Blitz chess is about instinct. When your instinct is good, you win fast. But when your instinct tells you you're trapped, the speed becomes a torture device. The seconds on his clock were dripping away like water from a leaky faucet. Tick, tick, tick. He wiped his palm on his jeans. His hand was sweating. He felt a strange pressure in his chest, a tightness he hadn't felt in a long time. He realized that he wasn't just playing a game anymore. His ego was on the line. He had invited her to sit down as a joke. He had treated her like a prop for his own entertainment. Now, the whole dynamic had flipped. If he lost this game, and lost it badly, he would look foolish. And in a college common room, looking foolish is the worst thing that can happen. Alina watched him struggle. She could see the psychological battle happening inside his head. She knew that chess is 90% tactics and 10% terror, and right now he was drowning in the terror. She decided to make it worse. She leaned back in her chair, breaking her intense concentration for just a second. She glanced at the people watching them, then back at him. It was a tiny movement, a casual shrug of the shoulders, but the message was clear. Asterisk, I have nothing to worry about. You are the one in danger. Asterisk, it worked. The king panicked. He couldn't take the pressure of her calmness anymore. He had to do something. He grabbed his king and moved it one square to the left. It was a passive move, a cowardly move. He was trying to hide in the corner. Elena's hand moved before his hand even left the clock. She didn't think. She didn't hesitate. She had seen this move coming 10 minutes ago. She slid her queen across the diagonal, landing it right next to his king. It was a check. Click. The sound was sharp and final. The king stared at the board. The room seemed to tilt. He saw the check, but he also saw the mate looming one move later. He moved his king again, the only legal move he had. Stepping into the other square she had prepared, Elena didn't slam the next piece. She picked it up gently, a lowly pawn, and moved it forward one square. It blocked his king's only escape route. It was the final nail in the coffin. She took her hand off the piece and placed it gently in her lap. She didn't press the clock. She didn't need to. The king looked at the board. The game was over. His king was trapped. There were no knights to jump in, no bishops to block the line, no pawns to sacrifice. It was just him and the inevitable checkmate. It was a beautiful setup, really. It was a work of art, but it was a work of art that was killing him. He let out a long breath of air, sound escaping his lips like a deflating balloon. He sat there, staring at the checkmate, unable to move. He was waiting for the alarm on his clock to buzz, signaling that his time had run out, but he didn't want to be the one to admit it. He wanted to sit there forever, in that moment before the loss became real. But the silence was too loud. The realization was too heavy. Slowly, he reached out. He tipped his king over on its side. The wooden piece rolled onto its side. Staring up at the ceiling in defeat, the game was over. Asterisk, the sound of the wooden king hitting the board was soft. A dull thud that seemed to take forever to register in the air. For a few seconds, nobody moved. The king of the corner kept his hand resting near the fallen piece, his head bowed low. The digital clock on the table continued to beep, a piercing, an electronic reminder that time had officially run out for him. But the noise felt distant and unimportant compared to the heavy weight of the silence hanging over the table. The friends standing around the circle were frozen. They looked from the board to the king, waiting for him to jump up and say it was a joke, waiting for him to laugh it off. But he didn't move. He just sat there, staring at the 64 squares that had become his prison. The smirk, the arrogance, the loud confidence, it had all evaporated. In its place was a raw, uncomfortable reality. They had watched a masterclass disguised as a casual game. They didn't know how to process it. One of the guys, the one in the oversized hoodie, opened his mouth to speak. He looked like he wanted to make an excuse, maybe blame the clock, or say the king was distracted. He looked at the board, searching for a flaw in the checkmate, a legal move they had all missed. But the more he looked, the more trapped the white king appeared. There was no escape. The position was airtight. The girl hadn't just beaten him. She had dismantled him, piece by piece, until there was nowhere left to hide. Finally, the king pulled his hand back. He rubbed his face with both palms, a gesture of pure exhaustion. When he lowered his hands, his face was flushed red. He didn't look up at Elena. He couldn't. It was too hard. Looking at her would mean admitting that he had underestimated her, that he had judged a book by its cover and been proven completely wrong. It would mean acknowledging that the joke was actually on him. "Good game," he mumbled. The words were so quiet they were almost swallowed by the noise of the air conditioning. He said it quickly, trying to get it over with, trying to brush off the sting of defeat. He started to reach for the pieces, tending to sweep them off the board and reset the table, to erase the evidence of his loss. Elena reached out and stopped him. She didn't grab his hand or anything aggressive. She simply placed her fingers on her queen, the piece that had delivered the final blow. The king flinched and pulled his hand back instantly as if her touch had burned him. He looked up then. Their eyes met for the first time since the game ended. He expected to see mockery. He expected to see a smirk, a gotcha look, a victory dance in her eyes. He was ready for anger. He deserved it after the way he had treated her, the way he had invited her to sit down just to humiliate her. But Elena's eyes were completely calm. There was no hatred there, and there was no arrogance. She just looked at him with a quiet, steady gaze. It was the look of a grandmaster looking at a student who had just learned a hard lesson. It was a look that said, "You are better than this." "You play with a lot of passion," Elena said softly. Her voice carried clearly across the silent table. "But you play too fast. You attack before you defend. You were so focused on what you wanted to do to me that you forgot to look at what I was doing to you." The king just nodded, his jaw tight. He couldn't find the words to argue. She was right. He knew she was right. He had played the entire game on autopilot, relying on aggression and intimidation. And she had simply stepped out of the way and let him crash. She picked up her heavy tote bag from the floor and slung it over her shoulder. She didn't wait for him to respond. She didn't wait for his friends to congratulate her or offer her a seat in their club. She stood up, pushed the chair back under the table, and turned to leave. The guy in the hoodie stepped aside quickly to let her pass, nearly tripping over his own feet. He looked at her with a mixture of fear and awe, like he was in the presence of a celebrity he didn't recognize. Elena gave him a small, polite, nada, simple acknowledgement of his existence and walked away. As she moved through the common room, the atmosphere shifted. The students who had been watching from the sidelines went back to their work, but the energy was different. There was a new level of respect in the glances they threw her way. She wasn't just the quiet girl with the book anymore. She was the enigma who had taken down the king. Back at the table, the group of guys was in chaos. The silence had broken, replaced by a flurry of whispered arguments. "How did she do that?" the tall friend asked, leaning over the board and tracing the checkmate pattern with his finger. "I mean, look at this. Her pieces are everywhere. She controls the whole board." "I don't know," the king muttered. He was aggressively clearing the table now, sweeping the pieces into the box with loud, clattering noises. He was trying to rebuild his armor, trying to look like he didn't care. She got lucky. "I made a mistake in the opening." "It happens. Wasn't luck," the friend insisted. "She set you up. She let you think you were winning, and then she trapped you. She was playing a different game than you were." "Shut up," the king snapped. He slammed the lid of the chess box shut. The sound made a few people look over. "Just shut up and play. You want to go?" The friend hesitated. He looked at the box, then at the king's angry face. Usually, he would jump at the chance to play. But the magic was gone. The king's invincibility had been shattered. Seeing him sit there, slumped and defeated, had ruined the illusion. They weren't the masters of the corner anymore. They were just guys who played chess. "Ah," the friend said, backing away. "I gotta get to class. I'll catch you later." "Yeah, me too," another one chimed in. One by one they drifted away, leaving the king sitting alone at the scratched wooden table. He sat there for a long time, his fingers idly spinning the captured black knight that had been left behind. He looked out the window, watching the students walking by, wondering how many other secrets they were hiding. He wondered how many other people he had underestimated because they didn't fit his mold. A mile away, in the quiet section of the library that had finally reopened, Elena sat down at a small wooden desk. She pulled her thick novel out of her bag and opened it to the page she had marked. She tried to read, but the words wouldn't focus. She thought about the game. She thought about the look on the king's face when he realized he was trapped. She didn't feel happy about it. Winning against an arrogant bully didn't bring her joy. It just made her feel tired. She missed her grandfather. She wished he were there so she could tell him about it. She imagined he would have chuckled, that deep rumbling chuckle of his, and told her that she taught them a valuable lesson. She smiled a small, private smile and turned the page. She was just a literature student who liked stories. But today, she had written a story of her own right there on the chessboard. It was a story about silence and patience, and the danger of underestimating the quiet person in the room. And as the library hummed around her, peaceful and still, she finally began to read.